Listen carefully, because something big just broke in the last few hours, and if you've been struggling with high prices, bills stacking up, or you're just desperate for some financial breathing room, you need to hear this from start to finish. A wave of posts has exploded across social media claiming that Donald Trump's new tariff dividend plan is sending out a stimulus-style payment to millions of Americans. And people are already asking one question: who actually qualifies? What happens next will surprise you, because this isn't just another rumor. This story comes from leaked economic briefing notes, private meetings with transition advisors, and early models circulating in Washington. And the details are shocking. Some insiders are calling it a household rebate. Others are calling it a purchasing power refund. But the name that's catching fire everywhere is the tariff dividend check. Now here's where things get even more intense. These reports suggest that households in certain zip codes, especially areas hit hardest by the last 3 years of inflation, could be the first in line, and that's why millions of people are suddenly checking online databases, scanning eligibility charts, and asking if their ZIP code puts them on the shortlist. But before you get too excited, take a breath, because the truth behind this plan, why it's being talked about now, and whether a real payout is even possible, all of that needs to be understood clearly. This is much bigger than just tariffs or taxes. This is about how a major shift in economic policy could put real money back into your pocket if it goes through. So stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to break down what the tariff dividend actually is, why it matters, and how close it really is to becoming something you could see in your bank account. Now, let's break down what this tariff dividend really means, because most people online are only seeing the headlines, not the full picture. The idea started taking shape inside early economic discussions with Trump's policy advisors, especially conversations led by economists like Dr. Warren Feldman and trade strategist Alicia Grant, who have been modeling the long-term impact of higher import tariffs. Their goal was simple: figure out how to turn tariff revenue into a direct financial benefit for American households. Here's the truth: when tariffs are raised on imported goods, the federal government collects more revenue. Traditionally, that money just goes into the general budget. But inside these new draft proposals, there's a new twist. A portion of that revenue could be redistributed straight back to citizens in the form of a rebate. And that rebate is what insiders are calling the tariff dividend. But why are people suddenly convinced that this could mean a stimulus-style check? It started when members of Trump's economic transition team reportedly floated the idea of giving front-loaded relief to households to offset rising import costs as tariffs increase. Several analysts, including those from the Jefferson Policy Group, said that if tariffs generate the projected $280 to $320 billion over 2 years, a slice of that could realistically fund direct payments. Then the rumors intensified when parts of a 19-page draft titled "Restoring American Purchasing Power" leaked online. Inside that draft were phrases like household credit, annual dividend disbursement, and even zip code priority indexing. That's when people started asking, wait, is this the next stimulus? Is this real? And who qualifies first? Before you jump to conclusions, here's what you need to understand. Nothing is final. These documents are early-stage concepts, but the level of detail in them is what made analysts take it seriously. They include income tiers, cost of living adjustments, and even scenarios where seniors and low-wage workers could receive larger credits because they're more affected by import-based inflation. And here's where things get interesting. Several advisors suggested that households earning under $75,000 could receive a larger dividend because that demographic pays a heavier share of their income toward imported goods. In other words, the people hardest hit by price increases could be the ones who benefit the most if this plan becomes official. But that's not all. Some of the leaked models show that the government might prioritise regions where purchasing power has fallen the fastest. That's why zip code rumours exploded. People think there's already a list. There isn't. But the idea of zip code-based payout phases is absolutely being discussed behind closed doors. So yes, the excitement is real, the speculation is loud, and the early numbers being floated make it sound more like a stimulus check than a tax refund. But before you get too excited, remember this. Everything depends on how the final policy is shaped and whether Congress and the Treasury sign off. And that brings us to the big question everyone's asking. If this plan moves forward, who would actually qualify? So now let's get into the part everyone has been waiting for. If the tariff dividend plan becomes official, who would actually qualify? Because this is where things get very real and very different from what people think. According to the internal models circulating among policy analysts, the first layer of eligibility starts with income. Early drafts suggest that single filers earning under $75,000 a year and married couples earning under $150,000 would be at the front of the line. Why those numbers? Because that income group spends a higher percentage of their monthly budget on imported goods like electronics, clothing, household items, and even food. In other words, they're the ones who feel the impact of tariffs the most. Then comes the second layer, cost of living pressure. Some analysts have proposed a purchasing power index, meaning households in areas where inflation soared faster than the national average could receive priority. That's where the zip code talk comes in, not because a list already exists, but because the models show how certain regions could be prioritized if the plan rolls out in phases. For example, zip codes with high rent increases, rapid grocery inflation, or heavy reliance on imported goods could receive larger dividends. That includes many urban areas, but also large sections of the Midwest and Southeast, where manufacturing and transport shifts pushed prices up faster than wages. Now let's talk seniors. According to the early phase discussions, seniors on Social Security, especially those living only on retirement SSI or SSDI, might be placed in a higher benefit category. The reasoning is simple. Their income is fixed, and they're more vulnerable to price spikes caused by tariffs on pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and household essentials. Analysts argue that a dividend payment could help stabilize their monthly budget. Veterans are also mentioned in some drafts. There's talk that disabled veterans, especially those with service-connected benefits, could receive an automatic top-up because tariff-related price increases affect medication, mobility equipment, and imported essential goods they depend on. But here's the part most people don't know. Families with dependents could see larger payouts than single adults. The leaked framework includes something called the household multiplier, which would increase the dividend for each dependent, similar to the way earlier stimulus checks were structured. The draft examples showed single parents receiving as much as 40% more than childless households because of their higher cost exposure. Now, before you get too excited, there's a catch. Several of the proposals mention a phase-in schedule. That means not everyone would get the dividend at the same time. Some plans suggest the payments could roll out in waves. Low-income households first, then seniors, then families with children, then general taxpayers. Another catch, payments might not come as a single check. In some versions, households receive a lump sum payment. In others, the dividend is spread out quarterly, almost like a recurring rebate tied to tariff revenue cycles. And then there's the scenario where the dividend is connected to your annual tax filing, meaning you'd see it during tax season rather than as a direct deposit. And there's one more detail people are missing. The economists advising on this say the dividend amount could change year to year based on how much revenue tariffs generate. If tariffs bring in more than expected, payments could increase. If they bring in less, payments could shrink. That's why some people are calling this the most unpredictable stimulus ever considered. But the biggest question remains, how much money are we actually talking about? Based on projections, early models showed possible payments ranging anywhere from $400 to $1,100 for single adults and $700 to $2,400 for families. Seniors in high inflation zones could see an extra cost of living boost on top of that. These numbers aren't confirmed, and nothing is official yet, but they are being discussed in real policy rooms, and that's why the rumour mill is spinning out of control. So where does this leave you? What happens next? And how close are we to knowing whether this plan will actually happen? And how close are we to actually seeing this tariff dividend become something real, something official, something that could land in your bank account? The answer depends on a series of decisions that are already in motion behind the scenes. Right now, Trump's economic transition team is refining multiple versions of the plan. Each version has different payout structures, different income rules, and different cost of living adjustments. Those drafts will be reviewed by advisors, trade officials, and budget analysts before anything is publicly announced. Once a final version is selected, it would need to go through the Treasury Department, the Office of Management and Budget, and then on to Congress for formal approval if it's structured as a direct payment program. Here's the part people don't realize timeline matters. If the administration wants households to feel relief fast, they may push for something called executive managed credits, which don't require full congressional approval, that could speed things up dramatically. If they choose the full legislative route, the timeline stretches longer, but the payout could end up being larger and more stable. Now, listen closely. The earliest signals of what version they choose will show up in 3 places. First, White House press briefings. Second, Treasury memos that outline economic relief frameworks. And third, IRS procedural notices. Those always reveal when the government is preparing for a new kind of payment or tax credit. If you see any of those drop in the next few weeks or months, you'll know something big is coming. And here's something else you should know. Analysts are expecting a draft outline of the tariff dividend structure to be publicly revealed long before any checks go out. That means you'll likely see income brackets, payment charts, and eligibility tiers before anything becomes official. If that happens, you'll want to act fast. Make sure your IRS information is updated, your direct deposit is active, and your tax filings are clean. That alone can determine how fast you receive any payment. But before you get anxious, here's some reassurance. You are not late, you are not behind, and you haven't missed anything. Everything is still in the early stages. Nothing has been finalized, no payments have been issued, and no zip code list exists yet. What you're hearing are the early warning signs, the early drafts, and the early leaks that tell you the government is seriously exploring this idea. So here's the bottom line. If the tariff dividend plan becomes official, it could mean real money for millions of households. It could cushion seniors, help struggling families, and offset the rising cost of goods affected by tariffs. But like every major policy change, it will take time, debate, and negotiation before anything is approved. That's why staying informed matters now more than ever, because the moment the government confirms the framework, you'll want to know exactly where your household stands and what to expect. And that's why I'm here, to walk you through every update, every leak, every official announcement, and every step of the process before it reaches the mainstream news. So if you want to stay ahead, stay protected, and stay ready for whatever comes next, make sure you're subscribed, stay informed, stay alert, and stay empowered. I'll keep you updated the second anything changes.